Hello humans and extraterrestrials. So today I am doing a very out of the blue, out of nowhere review. This is of Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. This is a book that I spent 4 months reading, not because I struggled, but because, well no, it was kind of because I struggled, because I read to about, I don't know what, till Wednesday, and which is about 17 pages in, and was like, that's read than that, actually, that's wrong. I read until, let me find, I'll find it. Find the page. Till page 144, oh no, I think I finished till Friday, rather, which is 147. Not because I hated it, but just because I kind of wasn't in the mood. But this is going to be a spoilery review, so I would be aware of that. I'm not going to... I'll tell you off the bat that I give it 4.5 stars and I phenomenally enjoyed it. But any more than that is kind of spoilery. I would just really recommend you read it before watching this video. Or at least watch the show or get the premise. Just don't, if you're afraid of spoilers, don't watch past here, basically. I'm going to jump about a bit because I don't know how to do a straightforward review without ranting into other things, but here we are. So, the first thing I want to talk about with this book is the story, because, you know, that's kind of the main thing for a lot of people. I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was such an interesting concept. I also need to point out that I watched the show before I read it, because I am one of those people that I will watch something and be like, oh wait, it's a book? Damn. I did that with Shadowhunters. I've done it with so many films. I almost started watching Noughts and Crosses and I was like, no wait, book, need to read that first. But yeah, I watched it first, so that might slightly change the way I view it, but I still thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was probably about on par with the book. I think the show did a really good job. I really apologise for that noise. I think people are cutting the grass or using like streamers or something. I don't really know. But yeah, this plot was really interesting. If you're somehow unaware, if you went to here and you don't care about being spoiled, this is a book about basically how many characters? So the 3 friends, like 10-ish people, I think. Can I do maths? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people trying to stop Armageddon, basically. The premise is really interesting and I really enjoyed it. Those people vary in many different ways and I'll get to them in a moment, but I thought it was, as well, I'm aware this came out in, not that books have changed a lot in the past like 30 years, but in 1991. So there were slightly less like of these AUs, because I feel like these kind of became more of a thing. But yeah, I thought this was phenomenal. In terms of story, I thought the story was such an interesting concept. But yeah, characters now. And this is one of my few complaints about this, I thought it was so busy. Like, I understand why, and they all jump together, and I really enjoyed that concept. I felt a bit like, I also as well, and this is a personal thing, whenever I read a book that has a lot of perspectives, I tend to have a few that I don't really care about. In this book, that happened to be, goodness, what's his name? The witch hunter, not the younger one, the witch hunter general, the old guy whose name I can't remember. It should be in here somewhere. Yeah, but him, he wasn't my favorite character. Shadwell. That's his name. I didn't really care for Shadwell's perspective. I thought Shadwell and Madame Tracy were interesting characters, but I didn't like, it wasn't because they were boring. It was just, I think as well, because I had already watched the show, I really cared about the relationships between firstly Aziraphale and Crowley, and also Anathema and Newt. Is that his name? Newt Pulsifer, right? Yeah, Newt and Pulsifer. I found those perspectives really interesting, and also I found the kids' perspectives really interesting. But Shadwell and Madame Tracy didn't really stick with me. I think it's also, I don't know if it's just, I don't know. I just found there was less to go with. I kind of liked the whole crazy guy. Like, I appreciated the concept. It just didn't ring brilliantly with me. I still read it and I still enjoyed it. It was just my least favourite of all the parts that I loved. Now moving on to the characters I do love. Aziraphale and Crowley, I'll talk about them individually first. Aziraphale is a good angel. Well, no, he is a good angel. He's just, he's such like a, this is gonna be me for most of this. He's so gay. Even though, like, I know that's not how, like, angels and gender, that's not how that works. And it's not, but like he's just so camp, and I truly love it so much. And as well as this, and I don't know if it's just, there's lots of comments, I'll find others for the speaking about relationships, but they're, for example, during whatever day it was, on page 100 of this edition, when they were playing paintball, if I remember. Yeah, they started playing paintball, and someone shot a paintball at Aziraphale. And he was sad about the stain. He was like, oh, I mean, I'll just quote this. I mean, just look at it, he said. I'll never get the stain out. Miracle it away, said Crowley, scanning the undergrowth for any more management trainees. Yes, but I'll always know the stain was there, you know, deep down, I mean. He's just such a camp pedant with a love for his clothing, and it's just, I really appreciate, firstly, it really resonated with me, as in I'm with him, but also it was just such a nice character to read, and also to not be mocked for it, because every single book, well, no, there's like a little bit, but it's teasing, there's a difference. In most books I read, whenever there's someone that's super, like, they care about their appearance, even if it's not in like a egotistical way, because for Aziraphale it's not, he just likes to, you know, look his best. It's not like a, oh, look at me, what, that sort of thing. Often in these books it's very it's often mocked, and it's really nice to see when it's not. I'm rambling, I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I appreciate his character, and he's just so, and again, I don't mean to sound biased, because usually it isn't a thing that I really care about, but he's just so like, oh, like he's like such a posh boy, and it's really interesting. Anyway, Crowley, I feel like I am sporting a Crowley-esque look today, actually. I mean, no, I was inspired by Sirius Black, but that's less important. Crowley is a badass. Crowley is such a badass. Aziraphale's also a badass, but Crowley is a badass. He is also, that's the thing with, he's such, like, as much as he's like super badass and cool, and like he's a demon and all that, he also is such a nerd. Like, just like, well, not a nerd, like he's such a dork. His forehead creased for a moment, and then he slapped the steering wheel triumphantly. Ducks, he shouted. What? That's what water slides off of. And my exact annotation here is dork. He's just such a little dork, and I really appreciate that too. And I'm And as well, it's also so nice to see a character. I don't know if I've ever highlighted it, but it's so nice to see a character who is emotional about, who gets emotional and who gets upset and cares about stuff, especially like a demon, and properly shows it and isn't mocked for it. Well, he's mocked a little bit, if I remember rightly, by the people from down in hell, but you know, they're bad, so like, what do you expect? But like, obviously he cried when Aziraphale's bookshop was burned down, when he was talking to him afterwards, the whole "I lost my best friend" thing. Whew, that gave me some emotions. And like, he's just, and this is just again, this is a very ranty review, but the scene in which it feels like he's trying to convince Aziraphale not to break up with him. I'll get onto this in a minute, but when he says "no angel" or whatever the phrase is, and the guy walks up to him and is like, "I've been there." That's just so funny to me. But as we're already there, we're going to talk about pairings now. Aziraphale and Crowley, to me, are in love. I know it's not canon in terms of like in a literal sense, like it's never stated. Although many things have been said by Neil Gaiman, obviously I can't speak for Terry Pratchett, rest in peace, but he has said that it's very open to interpretation, and that, I know a lot of people are like, that's a cop-out, just say it, but I don't care, man. It's not doing anyone any harm to like it, and I think they're sweet. And again, that whole breakup, there's so many scenes in which people from the outside tend to comment on them as a couple. I don't remember who it was. I think it was one of the angels was talking to, if I find the quote, I'll put it up here. But one of the angels was talking to Aziraphale. And he's like, "Oh, where?" I'm trying to remember what it was, but he called Crowley his boyfriend, and he was like, "Oh, well, are you chasing after your demon boyfriend," or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote because I haven't highlighted all the way through this, unfortunately. But there's still a lot of things like that. Unfortunately, a less fun one was that, I think I highlighted this as well. Trigger warning for a gay slur. The gay slur, the very obvious one. I apologize in advance. This video is not getting monetized, but someone calls, I'll find it. I know for a fact that it's been highlighted. I can't find it, but I know he has, and I know it's on this page. Where is it? Yeah. A girl who is friends with Warlock, who is like the kid that is, who is, you know, not supposed to be the bringer of Armageddon, who is supposed to be the bringer of Armageddon and the archdevil or whatever it is. He's supposed to be the bad guy, but he's not. One of his friends, I'll just read the quote, which is, and again, trigger warning for the F slur. He's right, you know, agreed a small girl with a ponytail. You are rubbish, and probably a faggot, which, firstly, that's a stereotype, secondly, it's right, thirdly, F you for saying it like that, girl. And also, the sentence right after that is, Aziraphale stared desperately at Crowley, which I know in context doesn't necessarily mean the way I'm interpreting it right now, but bless him. Honest to God, bless him. And but there's a lot of like reference to them being in love or them liking men, etc., etc., and it's honestly, there becomes a point where the subtext becomes text, and this book is a great example of it. But it's from both sides as well, because obviously there's a lot of stuff about Aziraphale liking Crowley, but there's an awful lot of stuff about Crowley liking Aziraphale too. As I said, the stuff about the bookshop calling him my best friend, and also the bit right at the very end. I cannot find it. But where on earth do I put it? It's back here. But the bit where the bit at the end when they're when they're having lunch, and he goes, "You're just enough of a bastard to be worth knowing." Wow, that's emotional. That's true love right there, folks. But it's so sweet and lovely. Anyway, moving on from them for about 2 seconds to talk about Anathema and Newt. They're really sweet. I really appreciate their characters. When I watched the show, I was slightly not perturbed, but I was slightly like disappointed by their portrayal, like retroactively after I'd read this, because in the show it just kind of happens, and in the book it's still a bit like, you know, it's still a bit rushed, but there's actual development, like they talk and stuff, whereas in the show, correct me if I'm wrong, it really just sort of feels like, oh, they've met, oh, they've slept together, oh, they've fallen in love, oh my god, they live together now. Whereas in this, and I think it might just be the pacing, which is both a blessing and a curse, and I'll get to that in a minute, it feels more natural. So yeah, and again, any relationships and characters I haven't mentioned, honestly, they're just not at the forefront of my mind. For example, I do need to mention this actually. Oh my goodness, what's her name? It's the girl that's best friends with Adam. I cannot remember her name, but I love her. Truly, she is one of my favorite characters in this book, or in books ever. Especially when they're not a main character, because she's not really. She's kind of a side character, and I really just appreciate her existence. Well, let me find it. No, I can't find it. But she says lots of very... And I think, if I remember rightly, it's because her mother is very much like, you know... Her parents seem, just from me looking in on it, very sort of like liberal, hippie, feminist types. Which is, firstly, hell yeah. But also she says so many things. It's like, this is... My mum says because this. And usually that's really annoying. But... it's so funny in this context. Pepper, that's her name. Pepper's an icon. Pepper did not consider herself bound by the informal conventions of brotherly scuffles. She could kick and bite with astonishing physiological accuracy for a girl of 11. I love her. There's so many things as well. I just wanted to mention quickly that this character is absolutely brilliant and reminds me of myself as a kid. But another thing about this book, I'm going to mention pacing quickly, because I have pros and cons about this writing, the writing style itself. Cons I'm going to go with first. The pacing's a bit iffy to me, and I don't know if it's because 2 people wrote it and they sort of... Because I don't actually know how this was written. Like, I know it started off as a sort of short thing and they added to it, but I don't know if it was like... I don't know how, in terms of both of them, how it was sort of compiled, or if they wrote certain scenes. Like, I don't know. But I have a feeling that as a result of them writing it together, it's kind of affected the pacing a little bit, because, again, and I've not read any other books of either of them, so I could be completely wrong here, but it seems to me that Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett have very different writing in terms of pacing, because it seems to jump a lot. Because you could be reading a scene 1 minute and you're like, oh my god, it's so slow, and then 3 minutes later, and then next scene later you're like, oh my god, what the hell's happening? How has 7 things happened already? And this is, again, I think I might have marked this very highly, but I don't care. But yeah, the pacing's interesting. Oh, another mention. I did not care about the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse at all. Their scenes really bored me. I didn't give a crap. And I don't know why. But they, like, luckily they weren't a huge main part of it. Well, they were, but they were less frequent, if I remember. Either that or I just fully blanked out half of them. But yeah, that. And now onto the actual writing. I think it's a mixture of both of them. But there are so many just good lines in this. I think it's very Terry Pratchett as well, because he, from what I've read little bits, and I started Snuff, and I'm going to go back to it at some point, but there's little bits that you just read it and you're just like, that's such a great line. I've highlighted some specific ones. Oh, not only are there like just good lines and descriptions and things, but there's also a real understanding of humanity in here. And I don't know, obviously they're people, so they know how life works, but sometimes you read a book and you're like, what? Have you ever spoken to another person? But like sometimes you read things and you're like, wow, that's so specific, but I really get it. For example, the owner of a voice like that would be the sort of person who, before making a plastic model kit, would not only separate and count all the parts before commencing, as per the instructions, but also paint the bits that needed painting first and leave them to dry prior to construction. All that separated this voice from chartered accountancy was a matter of time. That's great. But there's also ones that are just good descriptions. For example, this dog would make even a dog that... Let me try that again. This dog would make even a dog like that slink nonchalantly behind the sofa and pretend to be extremely preoccupied with his rubber bone. But there's also ones that are just funny. For example, Wall of Death, or at least Wall of Seriously Grey's Knee. That's great. Oh, and I'm really jumping about, but here's the quote from Pepper that I was looking for. That's sexism, that is. Going around giving people girly presents just because they're a girl. I know it kind of sounds like irony, but honestly, I love it. But there's so many lines as well that you're just like, has such a deep, good... They just have such a good... And I think it's Terry. I think they're both brilliant, but I think it might just be the way Terry writes, is that you read something and you're like, that's just such a good way to describe... They have a real knack for describing humanity well. For example, you couldn't actually be rude to them, but you couldn't help feeling about them the same way that, say, a Vietnam veteran would feel about someone who wears combat gear to neighbourhood watch meetings. That's great. And it's just... And there's ones that you just read it and you're like, damn. For example... Most books on witchcraft will tell you that witches work naked. This is because most books on witchcraft are written by men. And there's so many just good lines and funny lines and emotional lines and heartbreaking lines, and the phrasing is just meticulously good, but also the pacing's a bit so like, you know, sometimes it's a bit and I don't know if it's preference or if it's because they both wrote it, but this has been a very messy, a very, very incredibly slapdash, all over the place, messy review of this book. I give it 4.5 stars if you are curious. I did phenomenally enjoy it, but if you can't see the flaws in the things you love, then you're just loving it baselessly, and that's for me anyway. I'm saying these things because I love it, not because I don't. Is there anything else I want to mention? Oh, there's another quote that I wanted to find. I'm gonna end it on a gay thing because that's who I am as a person. It was about anathema, or it was anathema talking or it's her inner voice thinking about, ooh, where is it? My goodness, where on earth is this quote? This is phenomenally irritating for me. This is a quote about, it's from Anathema's perspective, and it's when she is she's either getting into or getting out of Crowley's car when they're driving her to her home with the bike. And I'll see if I can find it and put it up there, but the quote is basically something along the lines, there it is. Oh yeah, it's after she's leaving. And obviously when she got into this car with these random men, she was a bit like, eh. But I'll just read this. Aziraphale bowed again. So glad to have been of assistance, he said. Thank you, said Anathema icily. Can we get on? Said Crowley. Good night, miss. Get in, Angel. Ah, well, that explained it. She'd been perfectly safe after all. Which, the implication there, if you are immune to subtext, is that they are a couple, and because he called Aziraphale Angel, which obviously he is an angel, but she didn't know that, called him Angel, implication they are partners, and that as a result of that, there were no reason to be feared. They're not like going after her because it's just so sweet. And reading all that after, like, you know, reading that after having read the book is just such a little awe. But I'm actually done with this now, because if I don't finish it, I will sit here for 7 years and rant about this book. But I thought it was phenomenal, and I loved everything about it except the pacing, which could have been better, but that's personal taste. So, thank you, I'll move this. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, you know what to do. Please remember to drink your water, eat your vegetables, and peace out, I guess.